We're very lucky to have with us live in the studios this morning, Max Vekich. Max Vekich is a candidate for the Port of Seattle Commission, position 4. Start out, tell us a bit about yourself and why you are running for Port of Seattle.
You bet. I am a former 4-term Democratic state legislator from Kitsap South originally, and I'm in real life a longshoreman and now a supercargo, and I oversee the loading and unloading of all the ocean-going vessels that come into Puget Sound, and I work in all the ports on the Puget Sound. But I've also been a political activist since I was 18 years old as a Democratic precinct committeeman, and followed that into the legislature and served with a lot of people who are now in Congress. So I've had a history of activism. I've had a work experience of operational activities, seeing the loading and unloading of maritime commerce. And I've had experience in the public sector with government oversight as a state legislator and a former committee chairman back in the days when Gary Locke was in office, and Maria Cantwell and Patty Murray and Jay Inslee and Jim McDermott were state legislators. And so I worked with a lot of good people in Olympia, and a lot of good things were done, and those were between 83 and 91, the Reagan years. And as you will recall, the federal government was retreating from their responsibilities, and the state government then met not only their responsibilities, but shouldered additional burdens because of the Reaganomics and the retreat from their responsibilities. So I find myself now as a resident in West Seattle, High Point, a new green diverse neighborhood, working at the Port of Seattle most of the time, at the docks there, not for the port, but at the docks, and talking to people whose livelihoods depend on the docks. And clearly the port is not focused on its core issues of providing jobs and retaining jobs in the community. They're distracted by too many things. And that has to do with state audits. That has to do, I think, with the culture of cronyism at the port. That has to do with just losing focus. Now, I believe that the port needs to be prepared for the next big thing. I also don't feel the recession is going to hit maritime shipping in the Northwest as hard as it's going to hit other areas. And that already I'm noticing certain improvements. But that's why it's important, improvements in shipping. That's why it's important to stay focused. We need to be prepared to take advantage and maximize the economic benefits to the area if shipping comes back sooner than the rest of the West Coast. And I think that's very possible. But I have no confidence right now that that could happen. So why am I running? To make a difference. I have a good job. The Port Commission pays $6,000 a year. And so I laughingly tell my friends when they ask me, why are you doing this? And I tell them I only run for jobs that impoverish me. So having been a former state legislator, which back in those days you made $16,000 a year, to now $6,000 for a Port Commission race. I find myself, though, in this new era with Obama at the top, you know, we need good people all the way through. And I found when Lloyd Harra moved on and decided to run for another spot, and I had been supporting Rob Holland for that position, the other position, the one I'm now seeking. He moved over, so that created an opening, and I realized, well, I have the skill set and experience, and in fact, as an 8-year legislator, if I'm elected, I would bring more or as much experience to the Port Commission as all the returning commissioners combined, 8 years. And clearly the port needs some leadership. They need people that aren't yes men for the CEO. The executive director needs people that are going to give him guidance and direction and are going to question some of his moves and some of his decisions, I mean, that's only going to make that position and that person a better director. And I feel too many times they've rubber stamped the commission in the past, in the Dinsmore years, rubber stamped the executive director's decisions. So, Mike, you said you wanted long answers today, so you got one there. So, making a difference, bringing experience to the job, and keeping the port engaged and focused on their core missions of providing jobs and retaining jobs here.
All right. You mentioned on your website that in the environment is a key issue. Talk about that.
You bet. I've been a pro-green, pro-environmental state legislator in the past, and I was involved with the passage of the Growth Management Act. And the Growth Management Act is still being fought over today in the sense of we fight over industrial lands and keeping places where we can have work sites. And the idea of turning terminals into condominiums, marine terminals, that doesn't work in the big picture. If you want Seattle to stay a class of diverse income levels and a place where people can work and have jobs and keep a little bit of the grittiness, then they need a place to go to work. Lake Union is another example. Fisherman's Terminal, probably the most fun example of jobs and good jobs and hard-working people that make this community so different. And a lot of those hard-working jobs are maritime jobs. Like Warren Ackervik says, he talked about the $2 billion, the $2 to $3 billion effect that maritime jobs have on this region that are based in the Seattle area. So maritime jobs are important. Now you need a place to work. Growth Management Act, something I helped pass when I was in the legislature, really important, preserving those industrial lands. But along the way, preserving industrial lands, we need to make sure the port is a good neighbor and isn't messing its nest. The port should be more involved in the Duwamish cleanup, and the port had a lot of tenants that contributed to the muddying of the water there and the polluting of the waters on the Duwamish over the years, and also inherited some of the pre-existing government entities that also contributed to that and the changing of the course. So there's a moral imperative for the port to be involved with the Duwamish and in Elliott Bay. Sometimes, and so I'll leave that on the growth management aspect. And I've also been committed to water quality issues. When Booth Gardner was governor, I was involved with the Puget Sound cleanup. I was on the select committee that dealt with the Puget Sound cleanup, and at that time, the big problem was septic system seepage and animal runoff into the streams. Well, the patient's still the same. Puget Sound, still our patient, but now the big maladies, the big illnesses are runoff from streets and runoff from terminals. And the port needs to be, on top of its game in protecting the runoff, or keeping runoff from further adversely affecting the sound. And furthermore, I think when we dredge up polluted spoils from the Duwamish, I would really have a hard time in dumping them in Puget Sound or we're moving a problem from one area to another part of the sound with all the documentation of difficulties in the sound and dead zones in the sound. Why are we going to move toxics from one area and add them to another area when we can probably take them upland and hopefully treat them? That's my thought. Let's be smart and let's think holistically about how we deal with the pollution in the Duwamish and Elliott Bay and the water quality in Puget Sound. It's really important. We don't have a second chance to get that right.
So would you propose then that the Port of Seattle actually pick up part of the bill on cleanup for, let's say, our waterways, or would you be focusing on holding the Port of Seattle partners responsible for their share of the cleanup?
I think you got to go. I think that the both probably is what we have to do. The port clearly has a responsibility in the past, and they have shown leadership in certain areas there, but we need to keep ahead of it. I know the port sometimes likes to tout their own horn about what they've done, and I noticed that consortiums or other groups are working in collaboration. You don't always see the port on those lists. You sometimes see the port not there, and I am not a commissioner yet, so I need to figure out why they're not taking part, why they're not showing up at some meetings, and why. But as far as old tenants, absolutely, if there's old tenants around that have contributed to the pollution of the Duwamish and haven't stepped up and are still economic entities, then they have a responsibility too. And but we can take the model of the Hudson River, where Pete Seeger was instrumental in turning that around and focusing on the problems there and cleaning the Hudson up. If the Hudson can be cleaned up, then the Duwamish can be cleaned up. And by the way, they're having the Duwamish River Festival today, and people ought to go to South Park and enjoy that.
All right. Talk about SeaTac Airport. A lot of people don't always associate that with the Port of Seattle.
Yeah, actually, SeaTac is perhaps a bigger entity for the economy. There are more direct jobs at SeaTac than there are at the seaport, and it's vital that they that airport work well. There's a lot of issues the port is involved with there, obviously, because they own the airport and they manage it. Now, the third runway's now in action. Back when I was a state legislator, I didn't feel the port had done a good enough job in their mitigation plan in trying to add the third runway. I thought they were cutting some corners, and I thought they hadn't done the job of talking and coordinating with the neighbors. And consequently, I joined a lot of legislators then from around the area in South King County and West Seattle at the time, and opposed the third runway. And actually, I'm on record as voting against the third runway. Now having lived in Redondo for a year, or actually the Woodmont area for in 2006 and 7, I could see that those mitigation concerns I had were absolutely valid. That the soundproofing only went so far; it didn't really cover the true effects of the increased traffic, and that was before the third runway came into play. So, port bottom line needs to be a better neighbor. Needs to continue to address the problems of the SeaTac communities. The idea that, well, they should have known better because they moved there. Well, there's still residents there that have been there since the airport was created. And let's face it, technology's changed an awful lot since SeaTac started. And things have gotten bigger and noisier. And obviously, Seattle and SeaTac is a thriving airport, lots of calls, and I can't imagine anybody had the vision to anticipate what it was really going to be like. So we need to update our mitigation and our efforts to be good neighbors to those communities, because they are a vital part of our economy, and many of the people that do live there work there, and also at the same time, the port needs to make sure we have an airport that's not falling apart. We have so many elevators and escalators out when you go to SeaTac. It's very difficult. There's numerous environmental concerns, taxi cabs, for one, and deadheading there that probably need to be addressed. I mean, we could go on for a few hours about SeaTac issues, but I think the bottom line is SeaTac, as a port entity, needs more scrutiny by the Commission. And like everything else, more scrutiny from the Commission.
Would you push for reduction of use of the third runway if you had the power to?
Well, right now, I don't think the commission, from what my studies, I don't believe the commission has that power. I think that's all in the hands of the FAA now. Once you build it, I think you lose that option. However, we need sensible operations. We need operations that take into consideration both the business climate and the neighborhood. And people from South King County are excited I'm running because I lived with them. I was one of them, and I understand the big issue with the airport, and I want their voice to be heard. That's why Karen Kaiser is supporting me, a senator from that neck of the woods, and Representative Up the Grove and others. So,
transparency is another item you talk about on your site. What specific changes would you propose to bring about more transparency at the Port of Seattle?
It seems the port. Two things I want to mention. When mistakes are made there, I think the culture tends to want to cover it up and not open up the problem, not expose the problem, not talk about it. We had this Terminal 30 thing that recently happened with the trench was engineered too small for the wire that had to put in there. They call it the baloney that goes in the trench. And I talked to one of the electrical union members who was job was to, kick the baloney into the trench. And she said, when she kicked it into the trench, it didn't go down. So, and they all thought, oh my God, some engineer's head's going to roll on this one. Because it was an engineering problem, a mistake. Okay, so let's not worry about heads rolling. Let's talk about how we made the mistake and how we missed this problem. I always learn from my mistakes. That's one of my most effective ways of learning. And the idea that the port perhaps loses opportunities to learn from their mistakes and practices denial or avoidance, probably not healthy as an institution. Probably needs to let's talk about it, figure it out, and not do it again. That's how I learn. I think that's how institutions learn. That's how things happen in the state legislature, and you have legislators questioning agency heads. And so I think let's apply that and bring that to the Port of Seattle, that same approach. And I think that's one way that we can avoid these in the future and make the port more open. And transparency is really important. The idea that decisions are made in secret or with cronies, it has that reputation. And the second thing is when port commissioners ask questions of the port, they don't always get answers. It may take a while. I mean, I don't get that. That information's available or should be available. And the idea that you can't get an answer really soon, and maybe I was spoiled because in the state legislature, we have a nonpartisan staff that works for both parties, and they're incredibly professional. And when you ask a question, you're normally given an answer right away, and if not, 24 to 48 hours, and people are busting their tails to get that information to you. How else can decision makers make decisions? And the Port Commission is a legislative body. It is the legislative body of the Port of Seattle, which is owned by the voters of King County, and it's their job to make the decisions, and it's also their job to be sure they get the answers. And it seems like sometimes they're not getting the answers, and maybe they need to tweak that information gathering. Maybe they need to tweak that staffing for the commission a little bit. Not talking about creating a new bureaucracy, but they should be able to get answers to their questions. Yeah,
it seems like two of the big forces you would be dealing with as a commissioner would be the existing staff that's there. They seem to have their own agenda and direction. And then the other one would be the large corporations that are players like SSA. So how would you deal with behemoths like that?
Well, this is where our experience with the state helps. But the Port of Seattle has a big bureaucracy, is 1,600 employees. I mean, that makes them a large entity. And I've talked to a lot of the folks. Many of them are really good professional people trying to do their best they can. And I hear a lot of the frustration with the port coming from the employees. You know, not the department heads, but the employees, and who aren't supposed to talk to people who are running for Port Commission, but you know they do though, and they let you know how frustrated it is to work there, and but they tend to say they love their jobs, and so they're worried about the port's vision and future, and so I am too. And I share their concerns, and I'd like to see the port be all it can be, and make it our port again. So, I think though that dealing with the dealing with the bureaucracy of the Port of Seattle and the department heads it's more a question of continuing to ask the right questions, get the information you need to make the right decisions, help the port director, and give him guidance whether he or she wants it or not. And those are important aspects that can be done and accomplished with persistence and curiosity and inquisitiveness. We can get there on that. I am confident. Dealing with the big tenants, wow, SSA, world power, a world power. And I work for them once in a while. I work for actually all the shipping companies on a day-by-day basis. Some days I'll work for SSA, other days I'll work for APL, and some days I'll work out of port in Everett or Aberdeen. So I see a lot of different operations. I'm glad that SSA provides a lot of good jobs here. But I also think that they've probably been the favored child of all the tenants. And they have the most facilities under lease now. And I think they open themselves up for criticism in some areas by their lack of, I'll use one example, their lack of embracing of the rail at Harbor Island at Terminal 18. For years, they did not use it. And there's some skepticism or cynicism, I think, amongst Longshore workers that the reason they leased Terminal 18 was so rail wouldn't happen, because it didn't fit their business model. And so I think that's unfortunate and a lost opportunity of a lot of commerce that could have been moved by rail, which is a more environmental and I think a more economical way to go. But I'm happy to say they have now activated the rail at Harbor Island. And so they've apparently are feeling the high cost of fuel. And but I'm also hopeful that they're feeling the pressure of being greener. And I'm hoping that's part of the decision-making process with SSA. But I know a lot of the individuals there, and I certainly would have no problem telling them what I think and telling them where I think they ought to go as tenants in direction with their business to help grow the jobs here in this area. I won't be bashful, and I've always been my own man, and I'm happy to bring that to the table. And SSA knows that. They know who I am, and they know what I'm all about, because I've been an employee off and on for them. Not a direct employee, but a person who's worked on their facilities over the years.
What do you think about the recent being, over the last 10 years or so, trend at the Port of Seattle towards the conversion of port terminals towards cruise ships?
Wow, That is a heck of a question. The cruise ship industry has brought a lot of issues with it. Remember, these are foreign flag vessels. These aren't American or Canadian vessels. So right from the get-go, they're getting a break to come and ply the trade here. Now, having said that, they've employed an awful lot of people and a lot of vendors, and I think it's a positive. They've provided a shot in the arm. By having the cruise terminals down in Terminal 30, though, I mean, talking about, it's like showing your body off by looking at your armpit first. I mean, that is just, I can't imagine a more unappealing visual place than Terminal 30, you know, with cruise ships. And I worked there when they first came there. And so the move to 91, if you go to Terminal 91 and you walk out on the dock, you are so struck by how incredibly beautiful the place is. And you say, wow. And that's what the passengers think when they come and go in that terminal. So it's truly showing one of the best vantages of this beautiful city and area. And, you know, you're proud. When you work up there, you just feel good about it. Now, there's issues, design flaws. I think that the port made in how the terminal was constructed is a little confined, a little constricted. Issues with the neighbors and stack gas affecting neighbors in Magnolia. That's a concern to me. The port says the cruise ships are plugging in. Well, that's half true. Half of them are plugging in. They plug into the grid, these big electrical outlets, literally, that have been engineered there and are there, and half of the cruise ships plug in, but half of them don't. So there's the toxic stack gas that is in the area half the time. I'm hoping we can work with the cruise ship industry and push them along, or encourage the ships that are fitted to make this their ports of call. We're going to be seeing more cruise ships next year. Actually, you'll see more days because they've done well here, and especially in light of post 911 vacations. This is a good place to operate out of, and so, you know, Canada had a big head start on us, but I think Seattle's done real well in capturing their portion of the business, and the port needs to be continue to be vigilant, work with the industry, but not be a patsy for the industry.
All right, only a little less than 2 minutes left, so this is a tough one to squeeze in at the end, but you mentioned Canada. We're often presented with the port that it's competing with other ports. What's your philosophy on competition versus cooperation between the ports?
Oh, I'm a big fan of cooperation, and there is efforts. I attended the Harbor Safety Committee meeting the other day that's hosted by the Coast Guard, and most of the players were there. The port wasn't there that day, but most of the players are there talking about cooperation, and the shipping industry talks about cooperation. They actually have cooperated on air emissions and are working for a regional standard, which I think we need regional solutions. But we talk about competition with Canada, and they have nationalized health care. They have a national health service. And take that out of the equation, American workers look a heck of a lot better. I'm hoping we get a solution on national health care. President Obama is leading the way. As a union guy and activist, I've been involved in the debate and have pushed for national health care reform, and hopefully with a public option, a good one, a meaningful one. And so that helps our competition. Let's solve that problem so that the Canadians don't have an edge on us, and then let's compete then.
We are talking with Max Vekich. He is candidate for Port of Seattle Commissioner position 4. And Max, how can people find out more about your campaign?
Well, they can check my website at www.maxforourport.com.
All right. Well, with that, we're unfortunately out of time. I want to thank you very much for coming in and spending time with us this morning.
It was a pleasure, Mike.